Welcome to Extra Take. Hopefully this is one of those video titles that makes you go, what? But that's the point. Not because I'm trying to get famous. I currently have 268 subscribers, and my average video has 56 views. No, the point is that it is counterintuitive, but it is true, and our opinions on the topic are socially constructed and wrong. I don't want to be wrong. I don't want you to be wrong. In this video, we're going to take a look at race through two lenses, the social sciences and the hard sciences. And we're going to begin with the hard science. Take a look at these two individuals. The DNA profiles of these two are 98% the same. Think of how utterly different they are, but how it is caused by such a small difference. Now look at these two. While on the surface we look different, we are fundamentally the same. What defines a living organism? Appearances? No, that's not actually very significant. It's the genetic makeup. At most, any two random humans have around 3 million variations out of 3.5 billion in their entire genome. The two most unrelated people on the planet are still more than 99.9% the same. The 2% difference between us and chimpanzees only magnifies just how much closer, even than you think we all must be to each other. Race is synonymous to most of us with skin tone. It seems like these two people are very different, but the most significant difference in skin tone is a single base pair change in our DNA. Caucasians have an adenine nucleotide instead of a guanine in the DNA in a particular spot. One base pair out of 3.5 billion. The difference between black and white turns out to be a difference of 0.000000002857. Now it clearly has pretty striking phenotypic effects, but again, appearances are nothing fundamental. Now look at these two girls. They look very different, but they are fraternal twins. They have the same mom and dad. There are no species of human. There are no subspecies of human. We're all the same. I've never heard anybody say that white labs are superior to yellow or black labs. Maybe you prefer one, but nobody thinks there's any actual difference. It's a shame we don't apply that to ourselves sometimes. And even though there are slight variations in our DNA, those variations only make the story even more complicated and dismantle the idea of race even further. Let's pretend for a minute that it's the time before Columbus and the age of exploration, and everyone on Earth is living where their ancestors have for the last several hundred years, instead of the highly blended society we live in today. Humans live on all 6 of the good continents. They've lived in Africa basically forever since primates evolved there, but we'll say 300,000 years because that's when anatomically modern humans seem to have arrived. A small group or a few small groups of humans left Africa. There's some evidence that they were in the area of the Mediterranean, including Greece, Israel, and a few other places, by around 180,000 years ago. By 60,000 years ago, their descendants had reached southern Asia and Australia. By 40,000 years ago, their descendants spread into Europe. By around 15,000 years ago, we crossed into the northern portion of the Americas and then eventually spread throughout all of North and South America. Meanwhile, for the rest of those 300,000 years, the vast majority of the original human population stayed in Africa. Because all humans on every other continent were the descendants of only a few small groups that left Africa all around the same time, they are all genetically more similar to each other than the rest of the African population is to themselves. If you took the DNA from a citizen living in the Inca Empire at the time of Francisco Pizarro's invasion in 1532, and the DNA of an Aboriginal Australian whose ancestors have lived there for 60,000 years, and compared them, their DNA would be more similar to each other than two people in Africa who may live only 100 miles apart. This has been confirmed with genome testing of thousands upon thousands of humans. The greatest genetic diversity, and it isn't even close, exists in Africa, and everyone else in the world is vastly more similar. This is why race is so superficial and deeply unscientific. It would be like saying everything that flies is a bird. Now all of a sudden, bees, dragonflies, and bats are birds because we have decided the most important characteristic is flying. Race is an attempt to put us into binary categories because we think skin color is important. Well, not always binary. I remember singing in Sunday school, red, brown, yellow, black, and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. We actually called people red and yellow in Sunday school. Unbelievable. I know this might be confusing, so I have a model that I designed for my biology class for my visual learners. Let's pretend that all these dots represent different ethnic groups of people. Africa is the second biggest continent, and people have lived there for 300,000 years, so a lot of diversity has cropped up. There's only one tiny area where you can walk out of Africa. Let's say two small groups of people from the red and yellow ethnic groups leave Africa. As they spread throughout Eurasia, you can see that they only produce red, yellow, and orange populations. There's no genes for green, blue, or purple. One small group eventually reaches Australia, and another small group reaches the Americas. Hopefully you can better see how when a small group migrates and spreads around the globe, that actually makes them all more similar to each other than the original population. Now, a lot of people are aware of this, but they explain race as being a cultural thing as well as a physical thing, which takes us into the social science behind race. But these are people who don't know their history. White supremacists in America today want a white ethno-state. I obviously don't need to explain why this is appalling, but by their own logic, it makes no sense. What if my great-great-great-grandmother was black, but everyone else in my family lineage is white? Do I get to stay? Do we allocate one of the terrible states, Mississippi obviously, for the white but not quite pure white people? Actually, the point I'm trying to make is that white is a non-starter. Richard Spencer would have an impossible time convincing the white Americans at the time of the inception of this country of his ideas. Nobody back then thought of Europeans as white. Europeans hated each other. People have always hated each other, and they've always created reasons based on their own prejudices to justify their hatred. And an easy way to do this is to categorize people. For a few hundred years, Protestants and Catholics had been killing each other. The white people who colonized America were Anglo-Saxons, and they wanted nobody else to immigrate to America because they were not pure enough or something stupid. You had to at least be Christian because that's super important too. People who we would think of today as white referred to the Irish in the 1800s as inside-out Negroes. Italian immigrants were hated as well, although I'm not aware of any racially themed slurs that were used for them. Over long enough periods of time, people who looked similar enough to each other that you couldn't tell the difference between them came to America from so many different countries that everybody just gave up and we went off of outward appearances. Now all of a sudden there were the blacks and the whites and the savages. The Declaration of Independence labels Native Americans as savages. That part of it has not aged very well. We can go even further back in time, and the divisiveness between people is even more extreme. In the book Sapiens, probably the best book I've ever read, Yuval Noah Harari explains that the name of the Dinka tribe of Sudan translates in their language to the people. People who were not Dinka were not people. The greatest enemy of the Dinka were the Nuer. Nuer in the Nuer language means original people. In the Arctic Circle of Siberia and Alaska lived the Yupiks. Yupik means real people. Think of what is capable of being done to somebody who you disregard as being human. People who lived next to each other, who may have had the same great-great-grandparents, but lived in different tribes, literally did not think the other people were people. Race became nothing more than the new way for us to justify our innate dislike for people not in our in-group. It's part of our evolutionary baggage. Our closest relatives, chimpanzees, will tear to shreds and sometimes eat foreigners of their own species that they run across. We've sure come a long ways from that, but we do still have work to do. The only way we can hope to get better is to be educated about these things. Ignorance breeds intolerance. I'll paraphrase how I ended my first ever Extra Take video here by saying that it's tragic that this is something we have to learn, but we do live in a time where that realization has been met. For the most part. Thanks for watching.